Hello, true crimers and Demogorgon. Whatevs. We got ourselves another compilation video. I told you, I warned you, I'm going to be putting out a bunch of these because my TikTok page is on the verge of being permabanned and I don't want to lose all of the videos I made. So, this is going to be the series I did way back towards the beginning of my TikTok page's existence called Infamous Serial Killers by State. And this video is going to have all 50 states plus Washington, D.C. And that's because it's not going to be like any longer than usual, about an hour longer. So that's because originally most of these videos were just the 60-second clips. So, and then there's a few like 3-minute ones in there, including some multi-parters. So yeah, here we go. Without further ado, here are all 50 United States and Washington, D.C.'s infamous serial killers. Viewers, we're leaving that in. Viewer discretion is advised. Yeah, okay. Demogorgon fucking bitch. Hey true crimerers, new series alert. Most infamous serial killers from each state. In no particular alphabetical order. Wait. Starting with Alabama, it's recorded 164 serial killers to date. The most infamous one? Nanny Doss. This ice queen killed 4 of her 5 husbands by poisoning them. Her first husband survived and left her because he was scared of her. She would laugh and smile every time she described her murders. She received a life sentence in 1955 and died in 1965. Moving on to the darkened tundra known as Alaska, which has only had 51 serial killers. Their most infamous? Bigfoot. Wait, no, Jesus. Oh, Louis D. Hastings. In 1983, he shot 6 of his neighbors to death while they were waiting for mail to arrive. 1 year later, in 1984, he would be sentenced to 634 years in prison. Trish. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for our second episode of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Going alphabetically, we are now at my home state, Arizona. Fun fact, Arizona has a grand total of 156 serial killer victims. One of the top contributors? Mark Godot, or the Baseline Killer. This human piece of shit beat, sexually assaulted, and murdered 9 women in 2006 in the city of Phoenix. He was given 9 death sentences. Good job. By the way, during that same time, Phoenix also had the Baseline Shooter, Dale Hausner and Sam Dietman. They murdered 8 people and injured 19. Fun summer in Phoenix. Now on to Arkansas, who has had a total of 103 serial killer victims. The most famous was never caught. He was nicknamed the Phantom Killer. Every 3 weeks, he would shoot and murder a couple. He attacked 8 and killed 5. Spooky. Serial killers, aren't they fun? Oh, now I want Cookie Crisp. Anyway, it's time for a new episode of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. On this episode, California, who have had a whopping 1,628 deaths by serial killer. Neat. They've had some of the most famous serial killers of all time, like the Golden State Killer, the Grim Sleeper, Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, the Freeway Killer. Jesus Christ, California also leads in clever nicknames for serial killers. They also have the still unsolved Zodiac Killer. But coming in at number 1, good old Edward Kemper. He's fun. When he was 15, he murdered his grandparents and went to prison for 2 years. Then, he killed 8 hitchhikers, sliced their heads off, and had intercourse with their corpses. He then killed his own mother by smashing her head in, and then he removed her head. He does not like head. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for episode 4 of Most Infamous Serial Killers from each state. Next up, Colorado. Colorado's devil is Scott Lee Kimball. Like Richard Kimball from The Fugitive? I didn't kill my wife. I don't care. What am I doing? What's happening? This shiny 6-head fella, he was once an FBI informant. Ooh. He was released in 2002 by the FBI to be that informant. He then murdered 4 people. including his uncle, his cellmate's girlfriend, and a 19-year-old girl. He pled guilty to 4 counts of second-degree murder and is serving a 70-year sentence. Now on to Connecticut, which I always forget's a place. And we got, oh God. Yeah, you're so pretty. This chipper Kathy is named Lydia Sherman. She's an old-timey killer. In the mid-1800s, she murdered 3 of her husbands, 8 children, 6 of which were hers. She died in prison in 1878. No. Hi, we'll get started in a second, but real quick. Is this me? I sure hope not. So it's time for episode 5 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. We are now on to Delaware. Delaware has only recorded 14 serial killer deaths. And their one and only documented serial killer? My doppelganger, Stephen Brian Pennell. He was also known as the Route 40 Killer. He stalked and picked up sex workers, murdered them in his van, and dumped them. He was caught and charged with murder. He asked to be sentenced to death, and that was carried out in 1992. Now, Florida has recorded 845 serial killer deaths. I suppose I can mention Eileen Wuornos or Ted Bundy, but we're tired of them. So this is Christine Falling. In the 80s, she choked and killed 5 children. She was known as the babysitter from hell. She was sentenced to life. Aloha, everyone, huh? It's time for episode 7 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Next up, Hawaii. Hawaii has only recorded 10 serial killer deaths. Their number 1 murderer? That's a lot of face, bud. This is Byron Koji Uesugi? Call me Uesugi, Uesugi. This dude walked into his work, the Xerox company, in 1999. He shot and murdered 7 people and injured 1 more. He was captured at a nearby nature center and is now serving a life sentence. Next up, Idaho. Ooh, look at all them potatoes, baby. Idaho has been victim to 37 serial killer deaths. Their leading lady, Lita Southard, also known as Lady Bluebird. She's attributed to being America's first female serial killer. In early 1900s, she murdered 4 of her husbands, her brother-in-law, and her daughter, all by poisoning.
Hello, true crimers. It's time for episode 8 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Y'all do this makeup off, alright. Quit clowning around. Alright, we're on to Illinois. Illinois has the 4th most serial killer victims in the country, with 629 serial killer victims. Excuse me, sir, can you fucking float away, please? That guy. Who's their number 1 slicer and dicer? Good old John Wayne Gacy, baby. Why do all male serial killers have 3 names? Oh good, he's chunky too, like me. Oh, Fizbo! Well, it's not Fizbo. He was nicknamed the Serial Killer Clown. Creative. He would kill a lot of his victims dressed as the clown. Pogo the Clown is what it was. He would sexually assault the boys and then strangle them to death and buried them under his house. He had 33 kills. He was put to death in 94.
It is time for episode 9 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Next up on the list alphabetically, Indiana. Indiana has had 341 serial killer victims. And who's their number 1 guy? He's like the most boring fucking person I've ever seen in my life. This dude's name is Herbert Baumeister? He looks like a fucking accountant to a dentist. This boring creep was responsible for murdering 11 young men, and he buried their bodies just 50 feet from his home. When the police caught up to him, he murdered himself. Next up, Iowa! Iowa has had a grand total of 53 serial killer victims. Their number 1 guy didn't actually kill anyone in Iowa. His name is Carroll Edward Cole. You have a girl's name, you dork. He was born and raised in Iowa, but strangled and murdered 13 women across multiple states. He was executed in 85. Hey, how you doing, huh? Hey, it's time for episode 10 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State, you know? I killed the bull at Captain Crunch earlier, ain't no one giving me a fucking prize. What am I doing? Next on the list alphabetically is Kansas. I'm not well. Kansas has a grand total of 153 serial killer victims. Ouch! Their number 1 ass face? This guy here, huh? Dennis Rader. Nicknamed the BTK Killer. BTK stands for Bound, Torture, Kills. So he's the bound, torture, killed killer? He killed 10 people, he tormented police with letters, he finally got caught, pled guilty to all 10 counts of murder, got 10 life sentences. I hope you dropped the soap a lot of times. Next up, Kentucky. Yeehaw! Nope. Kentucky's had a grand total of 134 serial killer victims. Their number one nozzle of douche, captain of the Coke Bottle Glasses Club, Donald Harvey. He called himself the Angel of Death. He killed between 37 to 57 hospital patients. He was killed in prison. Oh, hello, my true crime brothers and sisters. It is time for episode 11 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. I don't know what the fuck this is. I'm trying to do a voodoo priestess. Now we adventure over to the great state of Louisiana. Fucking stop. Louisiana's had a grand total of 300 serial killer victims. Stop being happy. Their number one gal, Clementine Barnabette. She's the voodoo priestess who committed the voodoo murders in the 1910s. She would wait for families to fall asleep, go in and murder all of them. She confessed to killing 17 people with an axe, all on behalf of the Church of Sacrifice. She was sentenced to life in prison. Now on to Little Bitty Maine. They've only had 30 serial killer victims, pussies. Good job. Their number one evildoer, John Joubert. He killed 3 kids total, but 2 of them were in Nebraska. But he abducted and murdered a boy in Maine. He was electrocuted in '96. Hello, it's time for episode 12 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Next up, Maryland. Under the board. Oh, stop it. Maryland here has seen 185 of its citizens die via a serial killer. Who's their number one killer? Joseph Matheny. And this Sweeney Todd wannabe is gross as fuck. He would lure sex workers to his little trailer and stab and strangle them. Matheny here owned a food stand. He blended the human flesh of his victims into the meat. He said human flesh tastes very similar to pork. He was found guilty on 3 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison where he eventually died. Rats. Next up, Yankee Sock. Get in the car. Massachusetts. Oh, God, that's bad. Their number one freak in the sheets, this gray ghoul, Albert DeSalvo, also known as the Boston Strangler. He confessed to 13 murders, but some people don't think it was him. He was killed in prison.
Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there. Can you tell me what happened to her? There's her. She's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad tracks, by the airfield. What's the address? I don't know.
Oof, more on that in just a little bit. But hello, welcome to episode 13 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. I'm going to try to get this video as close to 3 minutes as I can. Next up on the list alphabetically, Michigan. Dang, does that bridge curve a little bit to the left? How you doing, baby? Stop it, that's gross. Michigan's recorded a grand total of 381 serial killer victims. And who's their number one killer? Ugh, yuck. This guy. John Norman Collins. Cleverly named the Michigan Murderer. Really? Okay. Between 1967 and 1969, 69, Collins stabbed or strangled 7 different women and then mutilated their bodies and discarded them. He was only tried for 1 murder and got sentenced to life. That guy was a tool. Anywho's you what's it? Now we're on to Minnesota. Wouldn't you know it? Minnesota, okay, has had a grand total of only 68 serial killer victims. I know, it's crazy. And who's their number one ender of life? Paul Michael Stefani, otherwise known as the weepy-voiced killer. In the 80s, Stefani here beat and murdered 3 women. He made a few more attempts, but those victims survived, including his last victim who was screaming so loudly people called the cops and were able to apprehend this creep. He was sentenced to life in prison, and he died of cancer in 1998. But he had a bigger trademark than just the murders. After each one, he called the cops on himself, begging people to find him. And he infamously whined on all of those calls. Like these.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every night. I can't believe I did like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else. Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Over 3 4. You find me, I just stabbed somebody with a nightstick. I can't stop myself.
Terrifying, am I right? Bye! MISSISSIPPI. I said PP. Mississippi is the next state on episode 14 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Mississippi has seen a grand total of 75 serial killer victims. Are you one of them? Probably not. Who's their number one not-so-nice fella? Glenn Rogers. In 1995, Glenn Rogers here killed redhead Linda Price. He would later go on to kill 2 more redhead ladies. Ariel, better watch out. In 2012, a report surfaced that he might have actually been the one to kill Nicole Brown Simpson, and not OJ. Okay. He's currently on death row. Am I in Star Trek Wars? Beam me up, Johnny. Oh, no, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri has seen a grand total of 311 serial killer victims. Are you one of them? Again, probably not, because you're still alive. And who's their number one fella? Who's your woozy killer? Oh, he looks nice. Huh? He murdered people? You're not nice. Terry Blair, if that even is your real name. What? It is? Okay. Let's see, what did he do? Oh, Jesus Christ, Terry. In 1982, he murdered his pregnant girlfriend, who's also the mother of 2 other children of his. And after that, he went on to sexually assault and murder 7 more women. Trial attorneys would say he's cold, calculating, and he was determined to kill as many sex workers as he could. Gee, I wonder what gave that away. Terry here was found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Fun family fact of Terry's here, 5 other relatives, including his mother, were also convicted of murder in unrelated cases. The family that kills together doesn't really stay together because they're going to be in separate prisons, so. Okay, bye, Terry. Oh, God, this guy's a creep. Do you want to, like, moose around later or what? Oh, hey! Welcome to episode 15 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. No, I gotta do this now. Just call me later. Jeez. Next up, Montana. I forgot Montana still existed. The state of Montana has clocked in with 41 serial killer victims to date. You guys are falling behind out there. Catch up. Well, maybe not. No, don't catch up to any other state. Their number one cockknocker is James Spader? No. Wayne Nance. This fella's cycle of murder began in 1974. He sexually assaulted and murdered a woman named Donna Pounds. However, no evidence linked him to it, so he was never actually arrested. After serving 3 years in the Navy, he went on to murder 15-year-old Devonna Nelson in 1980, 16-year-old Marcella Bachman in 1984, 1985 he killed Janet Lance. He also murdered Michael and Teresa Shook in their homes in 1985. Oh shit, you're gonna die in 7 days! So most of Nance's victims were skeletons by the time the police found them. Back in the day, they had to do all the clay stuff to try to identify them. God, Jesus. May you rest in peace, ma'am. I don't feel like they did you any justice, though. So, what happened to Nance? Well, he got death. Just not the way you think. Okay, I need you to go now. Oh shit, they got a gun! I guess we're doing this. In September of 1986, Nance tried to murder Doug and Chris Wells. He actually stabbed Doug, but when he was upstairs trying to sexually assault Chris, Doug wasn't dead. Doug managed to shoot and kill Nance, while he and Chris made a speedy recovery. Okay, nightmare's over now. Next up, holy giant wiener! It's like half circumcised, half not. Huh? Oh, Nebraska's next. Nebraska has seen a total of 76 serial killer victims. Slackers. Now, who's Nebraska's number one murderer, huh? That's not their accent. Charles Starkweather. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds like a Marvel character. Good old Charlie here started his little spree of killings because his parents didn't like his girlfriend. Why? Was she fugly or what? Did she eat babies? Charles? Fuck you then. So when he was 19 years old, he decided to do some spree killing. In 2 months, in 1958, he put the entire nation in fear when he would randomly kill people. No motive, no consistency. They were literally just random murders. He killed 11 people. He was actually apprehended pretty quickly, though. He was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Holy fuck, Nebraska does not mess around back then. He was executed a year later in 1959. I hate your hair flip. Bitch. Get ready to roll the dice on episode 16 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Pull up a stool, smoke 40 cigarettes, and accept random alcohol from strangers. We're here, the great state of Nevada. Nevada? Incorporated. No. Nevada has seen a grand total of 105 serial killer victims. That seems very low. I mean, the amount of hookers well, they have a couple good ones. First, you have Gerald and Charlene Gallego? Who's this fucking creepy guy in the back? Charlene would kidnap teenage girls, and then Gerald here would keep them as sex slaves. And then they killed them. By 1980, they had murdered 10 teenage girls. They were nicknamed the Sex Slave Killers. Cute! Charlene turned on Gerald to get a shorter sentence. Gerald was sentenced to death in both California and Nevada, but he died in prison of cancer. And Charlene was released from prison in 2013 after serving 16 years. Oh, good for her! Nevada also had Carol Cole. You got a girl's name. He was born in Iowa, but he murdered 35 people, primarily women, mainly in Nevada, but also in California and Texas, and he was sentenced to death in Nevada, where he was executed in 1985. Oh, the year I was born! People's souls don't, transfer, right? Fun fact, when Carol here was a kid, one of his classmates made fun of him for having a girl's name, which is what I did. So Cole drowned him. Listen, I mean, Carol is the manliest name. Carol, bro! You know? You a dead bitch, Carol. Ha! It is time for Most Infamous Serial Killers by State, number 17. And we're going old-timey. The next state on our list is New Hampshire, which has only seen a grand total of 10 serial killer victims. Their most infamous serial killer didn't kill in New Hampshire, but he was from there, and he built this lovely little hotel. Some people have called it the Murder Hotel, the Hotel of Horrors, the Castle of Horrors. And who built it? Oh, fuck. Me! Just kidding. Herman Webster Mudgett. He was better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes. This man is considered to be America's first serial killer and one of the most infamous of all time. And that's it. That's the end. Bye. Okay, just kidding. Holmes was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire in 1861. Okay, boomer. Holmes then traveled to Chicago, Illinois in 1886. And that's when he began using his infamous H.H. Holmes name. He got a job at Elizabeth Holton's drugstore in Inglewood. Eventually, he would go on to buy the drugstore. In 1887, Holmes purchased an empty lot across the street, where he would begin construction on a 2-story mixed-use building that would have apartments in it, retail spaces like drugstores. Holmes had a rocky history paying architects and steelworkers, to the point where those companies sued him. In 1892, he added a 3rd floor, and by the end of 1892, his building was complete. He told people he wanted to use the hotel for the upcoming World's Columbian Expedition, but the hotel portion was actually never finished. The storefront floor was finished, and then it gets interesting. The 2nd floor of Holmes's hotel would consist of torture chambers. It would also have a body chute to go down to the basement. The 3rd floor did have some apartments in it, as did some areas of the 2nd floor. He soundproofed several of the rooms. He built hallways that would maze around the hotel but end up going absolutely nowhere. Many of the rooms themselves would have individual body chutes to go right down to the basement, where in the basement he had acid vats, quicklime, and a crematorium. This dude's fiery. I like your mustache. And I shouldn't do it. Some of the furniture suppliers that Holmes wasn't paying would go on to find out that he was hiding their furniture pieces in these rooms. And at that point, investors in this hotel pulled out of their deals. And in 1894, when Holmes was away from his little hotel, police officers took a little inspection. Hello there. Welcome to part 2 of us talking about this psychopath serial killer, H.H. Holmes. Now, see here, where we last left off, police were on the verge of inspecting the hotel while H.H. Holmes was out. It's pretty much impossible to read, but go ahead and pause if you want to look at this. But this is a layout of part of the hotel. So police found rooms with hinged walls, false partitions, rooms that had attached secret passageways, yeah, that's normal behavior, and airtight bedrooms that had gas pipes connected to them. Gee, I wonder why. I'll tell you, he used those rooms as actual gas chambers. Once his murder victims were, well, murdered, he would drop them down the old body chute to the basement, where he used tubing and surgical tools to dismember the dead people. You know, a Thursday. And he would sell their organs and bones on the black market and to medical institutions. Yeah. Remind me not to take this guy home for Thanksgiving, right? Maybe I should. No. H.H. Holmes's first recorded murder is of his mistress, Julia Smythe. She disappeared on Christmas Eve of 1891. 'Tis the season. Holmes would claim she died during an abortion, but no one believed that. And it's reported he killed the child too. In December of 1892, I guess he has a pattern of hating Christmas, he murdered Emmeline Segrande, another woman who had begun working at the hotel. Another woman named Edna Van Tassel also disappeared around the same time. In 1893, he met an actress named Minnie Williams. He convinced her to sign her home over to him. They became a little couple, where at one point Minnie's sister Anne came to visit them. But after July 5th, 1893, no one ever saw Minnie or Anne again. At some point during all of this, Holmes became friends with a man named Benjamin Pitezel, who was a carpenter. You know, like Jesus. Now, Pitezel would help Holmes commit some, basic crimes, like fraud. And at one point, Holmes managed to convince Pitezel that they should fake his death for insurance money. And Pitezel agreed. You're bad at decision-making, bud. Holmes was supposed to find a cadaver to play the role of Pitezel, but he had no intentions of doing that. Holmes knocked him out and then set him on fire while he was still alive. Somehow Holmes managed to convince Pitezel's now widow to place 3 of their 5 children into Holmes's custody, and she actually went along with it. And shocker of the century here, those 3 kids would go missing. In fact, he confessed to murdering 2 of them and burying their nude bodies. In November of 1894, Holmes would finally be caught when the Pinkertons executed an arrest warrant because he had stolen 3 horses. And that's when they found the bodies of the Pitezel children. Hello, namaste. Welcome to part 3 of talking about H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer. Let's go on. In July of 1895, police would unearth the bodies of Alice and Nellie Pitezel, the 2 children of Benjamin Pitezel, a man he also killed. And this is when they began to search the castle. However, there was no evidence at the hotel of any murders taking place. But if you remember, it's because he literally sold all of the body parts and disposed of all the remaining ones. Now, there are a total of 10 confirmed kills. However, H.H. Holmes will go on to claim he murdered somewhere up to 27 people in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Toronto. Keep in mind, several of the people he confessed to murdering were actually still alive. He also claims 6 attempted murders. His confessions were perceived as nonsense, but these 10 people were either confirmed dead or they were missing and never found. And in 1895, the infamous murder hotel was mysteriously struck by fire. Several explosions were witnessed, and the entire building went up in flames. The overall structure of the building survived the fire, and it was actually used until they brought it down in 1938. It was, towards the end, occupied by the United States Postal Service. Well, someone had gone postal there before, huh? That was in bad taste. In October of 1895, our buddy H.H. Holmes here was put on trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. He was found guilty, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to death. And on May 7th, 1896, Holmes was executed by hanging at a Philadelphia county prison. And he was buried in an unmarked grave in Eden, Pennsylvania. Some people claimed he escaped execution, so they exhumed his body in 2017. And when they did that, they found that Holmes's clothing was actually almost perfectly intact. His body was even so well preserved that his little mustache was still there. Just want to smoosh it. And his body was positively identified as H.H. Holmes. And like I said, the building was occupied by the United States Postal Service for some time until it got demolished, and now here is a new USPS building, and the old building was somewhere to the left of it over here. Now, there are also rumors that say that H.H. Holmes might have very well been the infamous killer Jack the Ripper, who has never been officially identified. You see, Mr. Ripper here, he killed between 1888 and 1891. H.H. Holmes was known almost as like an OCD, like keeping track of everything kind of guy. And oddly enough, between 1888 and 1891, there is no record of where H.H. Holmes was. Now, more than likely, H.H. Holmes was not Jack the Ripper, but it's a fun little theory. Oh, God, these are feet. Ugh. This is part 4 and the final part to my series on H.H. Holmes. Yep, it's a long one, folks. So basically, we can confirm that H.H. Holmes had at least 10 victims, possibly as high as 27 or 34. But authorities even estimated he could have somewhere around 200 victims. But we'll never know. This case was turned into a book called The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. One I have not read yet, but I kind of want to read it now. In Season 5 of the popular FX anthology series American Horror Story, The Hotel Season, the Evan Peters character was based very much on H.H. Holmes. Oh, Evan Peters. Oh shit, sorry. And the book, The Devil in the White City, is being turned into a TV miniseries by Martin Scorsese. Hey, how's you fucking doing, huh? Hey, listen, we're on episode 18 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. I ain't fucking know if I'm doing the right accent here, but we're on to New Jersey. New fucking Jersey here has seen 207 serial killer victims. I'm gonna stop that now. Their number one guy is Captain fucking Angry Eyes over here, Charles Edmund Cullen, also known as the Angel of Death. He spent 16 years as a nurse in New Jersey, where he killed, they think, up to 40 different people. When patients needed him to care for them, he would kill them with prescription drugs, claiming he did it to relieve their pain. He only claimed up to 40 people, but investigators think it's somewhere in the hundreds. He was found guilty and got 11 life sentences. Now on to New Mexico. Oh, for fuck's sakes, Walt, put your goddamn clothes on! New Mexico has seen a total of 64 serial killer victims, probably all due to meth. Their number one, Captain Walrus Eyes, David Parker Ray. Beginning sometime in the 1950s all the way until 1999. This creepy dude would sexually torture and then murder women in a torture chamber he built himself that he called the Toy Box. Hence his cute little nickname, the Toy Box Killer. Ugh. He used chains, whips, and saws. Sounds like a Wednesday night to me. I'm very lonely. None of his victims' bodies were ever found, but they did confirm he for sure killed 3 people. But they presume he killed up to at least 60 women, based on missing persons reports, being in the area, that kind of thing. So he was certainly found guilty, and he was sentenced to 224 years in prison. Don't you wish they could bring him back to life and then make him live again in prison? And literally serve that whole damn sentence? But he died in 2002 of a heart attack. Aw, raspberries! Hey, Mets suck! Go fuck yourself, Yankees suck! Honestly, you both suck. Padres are the best team in baseball, and that's my team, so great. It's time for episode 19 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. We're on New York, bada bing, bada boom, let's go. New York has experienced 628 serial killer victims. One of the 2 worst is Kendall Francois, otherwise known as the Poughkeepsie Killer. It's very specific to kill people named Poughkeepsie. Wait, no, he didn't do that. Between 1996 and 1998, Francois murdered 8 women, and he just stashed the bodies anywhere he could in his family home. He was sentenced to life in prison where he died. Oh, Jesus! This is Joel Rifkin. In 1993, Rifkin here was pulled over by the cops where they noticed a really ghastly smell coming from his trunk, and it was the body of Tiffany Bresciani. They discovered that over a 4-year span, this man killed upwards of 17 women, primarily sex workers, and disposed of their body parts all over New York. Yuck. Most Infamous Serial Killers by State, number 20. Stop being so happy about it. Next up, North Carolina. Hey folks, why do you have castles? Good old NC has seen 266 serial killer victims go down. Their number one douchebag? Henry Louis Wallace. In Charlotte, North Carolina, in the 90s, 10 women were brutally murdered. These 10 women had one thing in common. This guy. He worked with them, or they were family friends of his. He even attended some of their funerals. How nice. He strangled all of his victims and hid them in lakes, and he's currently sitting on death row. Next up, North Dakota! It's just a bunch of fucking heads and rocks. What's so special about it? North Dakota has only seen 11 serial killer victims. Good job, guys. I don't have a picture of their number one guy, but when a man named Eugene Butler died in 1906, they excavated his old home. They found the bodies of 6 boys between the ages of 15 and 18. Fuck you, Eugene. Hello, true crimers. It's time for episode 21 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Next up, Ohio. Also, what the fuck is this? Hey, where do you work? I work in a fucking basket, alright? I don't want to talk about it. Ohio has the 6th most serial killer victims in the country, with 433 people dying by way of a serial killer. And who's their number one? My accountant. No, Sean Great. Not too long ago, I actually played a 911 call related to Sean Great.
Who abducted you? Sean Green. Sean Green? Sean Great.
That was from a 2016 Jane Doe who Sean abducted. She bravely made that phone call with him sleeping 2 feet away from her. She survived, and because of her, he got arrested. When police got to the home, they found 2 bodies inside. He would then confess to 5 murders total, and he was sentenced to death. Most infamous serial killers by state number 22. Next up, Oklahoma. Kinda looks like the Wicker Man. Not the bees! I digress. Oklahoma has seen 195 people die via a serial killer. Their number one? A 16-year-old Satanist named Sean Sellers. In 1986, this fella killed his mother and stepfather. He also claimed to kill a Circle K attendant in 1985. He said demonic possession made him do it. I use the same excuse when I eat Filibertos 3 times a week. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Next up, Oregon. Oh, so pretty. Fill the lake with blood. Oh my. Oregon has seen 170 people die by serial killer, probably because it's always so gloomy there. Their number one? A former draft pick of the Green Bay Packers, Randy Woodfield, known as the I-5 Killer. He murdered upwards of 40 people between 1980 and 1981. He was only convicted of 1 murder and got life plus 90 years. Woo! Most infamous serial killers by state number 23. Does that ring a bell? Next up, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has seen 420 people die by way of serial killer. 420, bro, what's up? Their number one blurry image of a serial killer? Harvey Robinson. He has the distinction of being one of the youngest serial killers ever in America. When he was 17 years old, he broke into the homes of 5 different people, sexually assaulted 5 women, and killed 3 of them. One of his sexual assault victims was a 5-year-old child. He was sentenced to death. It seems today that Rhode Island is next. Stop it. Rhode Island has seen 25 serial killer victims. Their number one cocknobbler? Craig Price. The first guy was 17. This guy was 13. In 87, he stabbed 2 of his neighbors to death. Then in 89, he killed 2 more neighbors. He was caught recently, so he's still awaiting trial. Hello, it's time for Most Infamous Serial Killers by State number 24. Next up, South Carolina. It's the best Carolina that isn't North. 162 South Carolinians have died by way of serial killer. Technically, their number one is Donald Henry Gaskins, but Adam covered him already on one of our videos. So we're going to go with another 3-name killer, Larry Gene Bell. In the 80s, Larry killed 2 people but was suspected of killing a lot more. He actually forced one of his victims to write out a last will and testament. He was executed in 1996. Next up, South Dakota. Remember when I used this picture for North Dakota like a douche? South Dakota has only had 7 serial killer victims. Their number one, Robert Leroy Anderson. Anderson kidnapped and murdered 2 women. He's labeled a serial killer because authorities believe he would have continued to kill. He was sentenced to death, but during one of his death sentence appeals, he offed himself. Bye. Most infamous serial killers by state number 25. We're getting close to the end here, folks. Next up, Tennessee. 179 people have died by serial killer in Tennessee. And I hope your number one killer is the only 10 I see. Oh God, never mind. Is he still there? Oh God. This pube stash creep is Paul Dennis Reed. He wanted to be a country music star, but look at him. He had one job, murderer. When he got fired from a job in 1994, well, that sort of sent him on a rampage. He would become known as the fast food killer when he robbed 4 different fast food restaurants, and he would murder a total of 4 people. World's worst porn stash here, well, he got sentenced to death. But wouldn't you know it, this douche nozzle died of pneumonia in 2013. What a bitch. Yeehaw! Giddy up, cowboy, it's time for most infamous serial killers by state, number 26. Next up,
Texas, Steve, Texas.
my name's Mike, but whatever. Texas has the second most serial killer victims in the entire country with 893 kills. Now, I could go with Rodney Alcala, the dating game guy, but we'll do a video on him later. Today, oh god, this is Dean Coral, also named the Candyman. Don't let appearances fool you. He's a creep. He was an unassuming guy who worked at his mother's candy shop. Seemed normal as can be, except he murdered 28 young boys right outside of Houston. He even recruited other teenage boys to be his accomplices. One of those accomplices is Wayne Henley. He helped with 7 of the murders and sexual assaults. He'd go on to shoot and kill Coral, and is now in prison for life. It's time for episode 27 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Next up, Utah. Aw, how pretty. Pretty enough to hide human skulls. Whoa. Utah has seen 77 people get murdered by serial killers. Their number one? Oh. Hello. Looks so boring. Arthur Gary Bishop. He was a serial killer and a child molester. In the 80s, he abducted and killed 5 young boys, children. And he actually pretty quickly confessed to the murders when police began to investigate him. He was sentenced to death, and he was executed in 1988. Aw, shucks. Next up, Vermont. Oh, what are we doing? Are we taking a nap? No? Oh, we're protesting. Vermont has only had a grand total of 11 serial killer victims. You go, girl. Their number one, Israel Keys. Bye! Just kidding. Israel Keys can probably pop up on a couple of different states' videos, but I put him on Vermont. Israel Keys would claim that his little crime spree began in 1996 when he sexually assaulted a teenage girl in Oregon. He would confess to investigators that he murdered 4 people in Washington state, but I believe they were only able to verify 2 of those. He would then confess to have murdered someone in New York, but again, authorities couldn't confirm it, but they believed it to be valid. In Alaska, he would go on to murder 18-year-old coffeehouse employee Samantha Koenig. He kidnapped her, he robbed her, and he sexually assaulted her. He would come back to her body many, many days later, put makeup on her, and took a photo with her. In Essex, Vermont, he claimed to have murdered Bill and Lorraine Currier. He kidnapped them, brought them to a farmhouse, shot Bill, sexually assaulted Lorraine, and then strangled her. They searched, but their bodies were never found. While awaiting trial, Keys offed himself. Hello, true crimers. It's time for episode 28 of Most Infamous Serial Killers by State. Today, Virginia. Don't do that. Virginia has seen 238 unlucky sons of bees go down by serial killer. One of their bad guys is Timothy Wilson Spencer. He would be nicknamed the Southside Strangler. He broke into the homes of 4 women, sexually assaulted and sodomized them, and then strangled them with a rope or a belt. He was found to be very guilty and was executed in 1994. Another interesting story. Whoa, look at that stash! It's like you almost snorted a full dog. Is it the flipper of a whale? I'm gonna tickle it. Oh, don't do it. This well-groomed gentleman is Floyd Allen. In 1912, he was in court for assaulting an officer. 20 of his henchmen were there watching the trial. The moment they announced he was guilty, he and his men pulled out guns and killed 5 people, including the judge. It's time for Most Infamous Serial Killers by State number 29. Today, Washington State.
Where the streets are painted with blood.
Whoa! Anyway, Washington State has seen 390 serial killer victims. And let me tell you, Washington has a lot of freaking murderers. So let's just cover the greatest hits, huh? Oh, hey, Ted, how you doing, bud? This guy's Ted Bundy, huh? Bundy's first kills were believed to start in 1971 in his hometown of Seattle. I'm very nervous around you. You're quite handsome. He would go on to kill somewhere around 30 women across the country. Hey, Ted, what's wrong, man? You look fried.
Next killer.
What is this thing? What the fuck? Why did you shave your chin to look like a butthole? God, is it open for business or what? This beautiful soul, his name is Warren Leslie Forrest. It's fitting because you got a fucking forest on your face. He's been charged with 2 murders, but authorities believe they can connect him to at least 6. He even killed 2 people that they originally think Ted Bundy killed, but it turns out it was him. You killers, man. You should, like, use Excel or something, you know? Like, for tracking purposes, you guys don't get crossed up. I don't think you know what a computer is, sir.
Who's next on the list?
I'm the guy. I'm the guy. This is awkward. This is Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer. He's one of the worst serial killers in American history. He was convicted of 48 fucking murders, but he actually confessed to 71. He killed between 1982 and 1998. Jesus, bud. Hi! Next is Robert Lee Yates. He looks like someone's dad. He was also known as the Spokane Killer. He primarily killed sex workers. They suspect 18 women were murdered by him between 1975 and 1998.
Wait.
Lastly, we have the tube sock murders. Apparently, this is an unsolved homicide case that took place in 1985 in the city of Mineral, Washington. 2 couples were for sure killed by this person, but they suspect a 3rd couple was also killed by this person. The first couple was shot to death, and the woman had a tube sock wrapped around her neck. The other couple, they found one with a whole bunch of stab wounds, and again, a tube sock around her neck. But again, never been caught, and they have very few leads, very few tips, nothing. So, in conclusion, Washington, get your shit together. Why y'all just out there murdering people? I still love you, I'm just frustrated. Hey, we're almost done with the list, folks. Until next time. It's time for most infamous serial killers by state number 30. I'm good. You know, I didn't want to leave out Washington, D.C., even though it's not a state, even though it should be a state. I don't have my normal stats of, like, how many serial killer victims there was in Washington, D.C., but there's plenty. One of the most infamous ones is the still unsolved Freeway Phantom murders. Between 1971 and 1972, some unknown person murdered 6 black women. Some people have attributed the Freeway Phantom to Samuel Little, the country's most prolific serial killer. But none of those murders have ever been confirmed to be tied to him directly. Another well-known DC serial killings is the DC Snipers. In 2002, they shot and murdered 17 people and injured 10 more. They were considered a spree killing, or mass murder, but the culprits were John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boy Malvo. John Allen Muhammad was executed on November 10th, 2009 by lethal injection. Lee Boyd Malvo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which was later reduced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Take me home to a place I belong, West Virginia. Yeah, I'll stop that now. Now, West Virginia has only had 37 serial killer victims. Rock on, sister. Other Virginia's not doing as good as you are, so... They're number one... Oh, wait. Look, Kinda. This is Harry F. Powers. Yeah, that sounds like a really gross superhero. Using the name Cornelius O. Pearson, he posted Lonely Heart ads in 1931. When he would meet the women, he would just kill them and rob them. They've confirmed up to 5 kills, but they suspect more. He was executed in 1932. Craigs, how you doing? It's time for most infamous serial killers by state number 31, don't you know it? Today, we're doing Wisconsin. Now, I repeatedly serial killed a Wisconsin accent on a daily basis, but that does not count towards the 118 serial killer deaths this state has had. I'm sorry, but I have to choose the number 1, the OG, Ed Gein, because he's one of the craziest motherfuckers on earth. He inspired Leatherface, Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill. Now, he had 2 confirmed kills, but they found the dismembered remains of at least 9 bodies in his home. When he was caught in 1957, and trigger warning, I'm about to show a very disturbing image. You have been warned. They found souvenirs he had made out of human parts. A person's face made into a mask. Utensils made out of bones. He also had a wastebasket made of human skin covering chairs. His bedposts were made out of skulls, bowls made out of human skulls, a corset made out of the female torso skin from shoulder to waist, leggings made from human skin. We found a human heart on top of his stove, a belt made from human nips. He had just 4 noses chilling around. Oh, he used lips for the drawstrings on his blinds. A lampshade made out of a human face. Oh, and he just had fingernails. Full fingernails, just, and then just various other skulls and bones in bags or just on the ground. So, who wants chowder? It's time for Most Infamous Serial Killers by State number 32. And this is the series finale. Wyoming. Wyoming has seen only 27 deaths by a serial killer, and 22 of them come from one person. This Debbie Downer, Polly Bartlett. Don't let those hollow, soulless eyes fool ya. She'll cut a bitch. Actually, no, she won't. She'll poison a bitch. You see, Polly ran a little inn in Wyoming, right here, and she did so with her family. So what did she do? She poisoned at least 22 guests with arsenic. Can you guys pick a different poison for Christ's sakes? Jeez. And then she would chuck the bodies in a corral. Oh, and they were also all men. Authorities would find all 22 bodies. Frumpy Karen here was supposed to stand trial, but she was shot to death by one of the victim's family members. Oh, raspberries! She is considered Wyoming's first and worst serial killer. And that's the series.